Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation on Erikson's stage 3, which he entitles as Initiative versus Guilt. Generally these are referring to the ages of 4 to 6. In synopsis, children at this age develop a need for independence and a feeling to influence the world around them. There's an emotional need to accomplish tasks rather than simply be independent. So in juxtaposition to the previous stage, where children are simply expressing their independence, whether it be through walking, through some type of communication, whatever that may be, whether it be through potentially potty training, in this stage, children feel a need to control the environment around them or to manipulate it much more and to engage with it. And through their engagement, as we're going to see later, that's going to determine to a great extent the child's feeling of self-confidence and self-esteem about themselves and their relationship to the world around them. In play activities, the child moves around much more freely and more aggressively and develops an increasingly larger radius of operations. So as we'll see in next upcoming slides, the play activities are not just simply engaging with the items in front of us. For example, my daughter Miriam, who is 2 years old, plays with the Legos. She takes the Legos, she bangs them. She takes another toy, she bangs it. Not necessarily any type of creative engagement with the toy itself. Whereas my daughter, and I'm going to refer to my children a lot because I have personal experience in this in a lot of these stages. My daughter Nechama, who is 4 years old, not only will start building things with the Legos, but start manipulating the toys, breaking them apart, taking one piece from another piece, trying to put them together, things that are not necessarily from an adult perspective that make much sense, but nonetheless, Nechama will do it because she is testing the waters and the boundaries of the world around her. In the process of developing initiative, goal setting emerges and activities become increasingly guided by a purpose. So my daughter Nechama very recently started helping my wife with setting up the house for Shabbat, for Shabbos, and she is much more engaged in purposeful activities rather than when she was younger, where she would try to help and she would be engaged, but much less purposeful, if that makes any sense. In addition, one can observe aggressive manipulation of objects, especially toys. By playing, children are able to master their problems and contain their anxiety. As they are aware of the make-believe qualities of the play activity, they feel in control of the dangerous situation that they themselves may have created. One interesting thing what I noticed with my children, Yisraella, who is 6 years old, and Nechama, who is 4 years old, when they go to a play place, let's say we take them to a very popular New Jersey, right outside the city, is called Urban Air, which is a trampoline place, a place where you can, go on slides. My children can be afraid of the thing in front of them, whereas they'll come home, they'll take the pillows, they'll take the couch cushions off, and they'll take the blankets and make forts and make things that they'll jump on. And you look at them and you think to yourself, my gosh, someone is going to get hurt. And they express more aggressiveness in the things that they have created and have put together than even what they express when they go out into the real world. And I think this is expressive, this idea that as long as they feel in control, children will engage in risky behavior and test the waters because they're in control. They've created that situation, not something that's external to them. Something external, my daughter Nechama, she is as wild as can be when it comes to her own toys. She will take them and do things with them that no rational human being would do. But yet, on the other hand, when it comes to external activities, let's say, for example, ice skating, even if you put her on one of those toys which enables her to go on the ice without having to skate at all, she gets very nervous because, again, she's not in control of the situation. Just wanted to show a funny way to show this age. Obviously, not all the kids on this video are necessarily in the age bracket we're talking about, but this is the basic concept.
you doing? What are you doing to Addison? What did you do with your stickers, Brayden?
So I can't guarantee that all the children in that video are, like I mentioned before, ages 4 to 6, which is the stage 3 that we're talking about in Erikson's developmental theory. But it's very interesting to notice that the children don't necessarily have inherent shame for the activities that they're involved with. If anything, they smile. They think that there's nothing wrong with what they're engaging with, because I think, like we said before, these children don't necessarily have developed sense of what is good, what is right, and what is not right, and what is not good. So when they perform these activities, it's not out of a maliciousness. It's very hard as a parent to not feel that a child, when they're engaged in such activity, I can tell from personal experience, that you would think a child, when engaging with such activities, is doing it maliciously. To quote the title of a book that my wife is reading, "No Child is Bad." These children are merely testing the waters, like we mentioned before. They don't know necessarily what they're engaged with is wrong. They're just trying to investigate their surroundings and see what they can do and what they cannot do. So this is really developing the self and a view of the self. That's when in stage 3 is such a large emphasis on this. They're experiencing some control over their world, and they're enjoying the effects of asserting themselves. There's an egocentrism that is developed at this age, where it's hard for a child to understand what the other is experiencing. The child who is engaged with other children doesn't necessarily feel what the other is feeling. There is, starting in this stage, and I believe Erikson said this, that there's a development of that there is an other besides myself, but there's not necessarily an empathy or sympathy that is developed for the other's experience. It's more based upon my own perspective of what the other child or the other entity is feeling. Or not what they're feeling, but what I'm feeling about them, and what I feel that they may be experiencing, but not actually what they're experiencing. This term egocentrism, we're going to see, is part of another theory that might be alternative to Erikson. But nonetheless, I'm still using the term egocentrism because I think it's still relevant to Erikson's theory, and gives us a sense that even in stage 3, they're starting to get out of themselves, just experience the world from their eyes, and starting to see that there is another human being besides themselves. There's a parent, there's a caregiver, there's another child to engage with. And as we'll see later in later slides, there is going to be engagement with other children to the extent of which there's going to be cooperative play and friendship and relationships developed. So as emphasized before, this is the me versus not me. It's not me versus someone else. It is just not me. During this stage, children learn to distinguish me from not me. They also develop the capacity to construct and enjoy fantasies, activities that originate in the transitional space and that lead to the consolidation of ego boundaries and the establishment of object relationships. So it is common in this age, and I've experienced this personally, for children to look at stuffed animals and give them personalities and to give them voices. They're starting to see their environment around them not merely as something to just explore, but something to have a relationship with. So it's not merely like my daughter Miriam, who is 2 years old, who's going to bang the Legos, who's going to take the toy and do what she wants with it. It's going to be that the item, actually, I have a relationship with it. I'm going to talk with it. I'm going to have a drink with it. I'm going to go on a trip with it. It's developed more so in this age than in the previous age. So where's the conflict? Where's the problem that might develop at this stage? So Erikson is very clear about this. A conflict arises now between an aggressive intrusion into the world by way of activity, curiosity, and exploration, or an immobilization by fear and guilt. So there's the parent, there's the caregiver. The parent and caregiver needs to create boundaries and rules by which the child can operate. Because, as we'll see later, if the child has no rules and he has no boundaries, then the child will inherently feel that they're not guided. They're not provided with the guidance that they need. If a child is given too much guidance, or if we want to say more authoritarian style of parenting, then the child will not engage in the activity and curiosity that is necessary at this stage, and that will be quashed. And we'll see some of those problems develop later in next slides. While the child seeks confidence building and independence seeking, it is important for the child to receive encouragement, tolerance, and understanding from parents and teachers. As mentioned before, this is one of the hardest parts of raising a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, or a 6-year-old, is giving the child that encouragement and tolerance. Now, that can be expressed in a multitude of ways. And we'll see a video in a second about that as well. That it's about lowering yourself to the child, potentially, whether it be literally kneeling down on the ground, talking to the child when the child does something that we need to engage the child in, when it comes to activity that could be dangerous for them, or dangerous to themselves, dangerous to others, something that is a value that we want to create in our home. We don't want our home to become a complete mess, whatever it may be. So it's important for the child to understand that it's coming from a place of love and encouragement. And whatever type of, if you will, rule that we're going to give to that activity is not because of any negative that we have towards the activity itself or the curiosity. Instead, it's based in love. It's based in, instead of simply onerous rules, but discipline, which discipline we could define as guidance, providing the child with with purposeful guidance so that they understand what is right and wrong, and understand boundaries, and understand rules, and that they come from a healthy place. So I was mentioning before, a parent could kneel on the ground. A parent could actually engage in the curiosity and the activity. A parent could take a child outside and initiate activity and curiosity. These are ways that children can understand that parents or teachers are encouraging them in this stage rather than immobilizing them. So what is the parent's role? I sort of alluded to it in the previous slide, but there are 3 key qualities of the parent-child relationship: warmth and connection. Again, warmth and connection doesn't necessarily mean spending a lot of time per se, which spending a lot of time would be great, but it's meaningful time. It's a feeling that the child can come to you for guidance and regulation. As we said, as we see in the next part of the slide, guidance and regulation, and psychological autonomy and granting. We're giving the opportunity to the child to express their feelings, that their feelings matter. The parent must be consistent in their support of childhood exploration while keeping the child safe. And this is the balance that the parent must keep as a sensitive balance. If it teeters towards one side or the other, that's where danger results, either creating a child who is lacking in self-confidence, that their autonomy and their exploration is not good, or we're giving them so much exploration, we're giving them so much autonomy that they don't feel safe, they don't feel guided. From a sense of self-control without loss of self-esteem comes a lasting sense of goodwill and pride. From a sense of loss of self-control and a foreign over-control comes a lasting propensity for doubt and shame. I alluded to before, but I don't remember one of the names for the type of parental style. But there's authoritarian. Generally, there's four. Authoritarian, authoritative. Okay. There's also permissive, and then worse than even permissive is a parent who literally is not there. I don't remember the technical term for it. Generally, psychologists say that a parent who is authoritative is generally, that creates the most success in children. So again, it's a careful balance to give the child rules, to give the child a sense of safety, while at the same time enabling them to have the self-control over their situation. When you walk into the room and you see your 4 or 5 chairs, along with all the blankets and the pillows and everything stacked up into a fort, and you're like, my kids are not going to clean this up. It's important as a parent, and I've made this mistake. We all make this mistake. It's normal. It's hard to walk into a room and not get incredibly angry and say to your children, what is this? What are you doing? It's important to give a sense of an ability to the children to allow this exploration, while at the same time saying to them after 15 minutes, okay, we made this mess, let's clean it up. If this curiosity is interpreted as destructiveness, we walk into the room and see the fort that's being built, and we say, this is really, really bad, this is not good. If the child is punished and made to feel guilty, initiative may wane, and that's a big challenge here in stage 3. This is a very cute video about that very point, about a parent who is engaged with their child in fantasy play. I found interesting about this video was the child mentioned about coffee. The child, hopefully at that age, has not drunk coffee. The parent has drunk coffee. So the child obviously wants to be like the parent. And here's the parent mention coffee and goat's milk, etc., and wants to be like the parent in the sense of self-control over her environment. So she laid down the blanket. She laid down the situation where she is playing, fantasy playing with all the toys in front of her. That is obviously her desire to create a system that she is comfortable with, exploring something where she feels safe. It's also interesting at the end, at least from what I noticed, is that at the end she recognizes that everything was play up until the moment where she looks at her mother and says, "Can we have the real food?" That was interesting to me because I think the child understood what the difference between fantasy and real play was, and it was a maturity level. But obviously at this age, when they are fantasy playing, it's not because they recognize that what, or it may not necessarily be, that what they're experiencing is real per se, but it's their exploration of themselves. So what's the consequence of quashing that? Let's say we don't act like the parent in the previous video. A dystonic outcome is likely if parents restrain, resist, and punish the newly developing initiative too much. For example, by making the child feel guilty for taking toys apart or exploring his own or someone else's body. If the child's exploration and initiative encounters severe reprimand and punishment, the result may be a more permanent immobilization by guilt, inhibition by fear, role inhibition, role fixation, and over dependence on adults. Since these attributes interfere with identity formation during adolescence, a negative outcome at this stage would contribute to the emergence of identity diffusion in adolescence. So instead of reacting positively to that exploration, we say to the child, "That's bad. You shouldn't have broken that toy. You shouldn't have taken this part of the toy and done with this with it. Why are you doing it this way? That's not the right way to do things." Children will then feel that they cannot do things on their own. They're going to be overly dependent upon adults, and they're going to lack that self-esteem later on in life. Something also interesting in stage 3, which is not often mentioned, is that children will explore and manipulate their own bodies as well as those of friends, and this exploratory behavior does involve curiosity about sex organs. We are in a graduate class. We can be mature enough to talk about this. My children, both Nechama and Yisrael, 4 years old and 6 years old, I actually started off with Yisrael at 6 years old, take their stuffed animals, and they put the stuffed animals in that part of the body, and they do things with the stuffed animals. We asked our pediatrician about this. I'm not trying to be too graphic. I'm trying to be refined about this. We asked the pediatrician. The pediatrician said this is completely normal. And our pediatrician said to us, and we followed this advice, that the only thing we should say to our children about this is that this is something we don't do in public. This is not something we share with our friends. This is something we do in the privacy of our home and our bed and other private areas. It's absolutely fine to explore it. You're absolutely allowed to do. And my children, it's funny, they take their stuffed animals. One of the stuffed animals is Joey. He's the sheep. And Larry is the giraffe. Those are the names I gave the animals. And my kids, for some odd reason, they wanted to follow me on the naming of these stuffed animals. These stuffed animals, we call it Joey time and Larry time. So the children are encouraged to do it because, as our pediatrician said, if you don't allow the children to express this, and they don't understand it as sexuality, right? We look at it as adults and think this is sexual expression. And it probably is. Or it could be, or it could not be. I'm not sure exactly. I'm not a professional when it comes to these issues. However, the children do not look at it this way. They're exploring their own bodies, and that's part of the stage. Social criticism and punishment may foster the development of guilt feelings in regard to sexual exploration. That's exactly what the pediatrician told us. If you suppress this now, you tell them that this is not good, you shouldn't be doing this, etc., it will only come out at the end as a negative expression by them. The aggressive behavior, including exploration of the bodies of other people, is accompanied by the rudimentary form of cooperation with others in play activities and games. So you start seeing, as children get older, our Miriam, who is 2 years old, she does play with others, but it's only on her terms. She was in school the other day in preschool, and there was a kid who walked by a toy that she was simply sitting next to, and she screamed at the baby, and screamed, "Not nice! Not nice!" That's how she talks. Not nice. Whereas our older children, both Nechama and Yisraela, play with other children. They still look at it from their perspectives. However, there is more complex play activities that are being experienced with other children. Solutions to parental quashing. So what happens when a parent quashes this natural part of growing up? So Erikson, I don't believe, provides any solutions. We talked about it in the previous class that Erikson himself doesn't provide any real solutions, especially at this age. How can you imagine that a 4-year-old and 6-year-old will understand how to fix what is going on at home? But one potential solution, a child could grow up in many settings beyond the home, and that's where solutions could come. Where in preschool, schools, community-based organizations, youth groups, and friendship groups, the children are given the ability to explore that which they cannot do at home, let's say, if it's an unhealthy home, which can also play a powerful role in their healthy and successful development. The individual should seek reassurance through attaining reasonable goals and expanding support networks. Now, that's obviously not the case with a 4-year-old or 6-year-old. A 4-year-old and a 6-year-old are not going to seek reassurance through reasonable goals and expanding support networks, but we're talking about later on in life. That if a child, unfortunately, did not receive this ability to explore themselves and explore the environment around them, this is something that they can work on with a therapist or a social worker in order to improve their current situation. More solutions for the quashing. A child grows up, we mentioned this before. Society as a whole could provide assistance to enable the child to be given more freedom to explore their individuality or quash their pursuit of an identity. So, for example, if a society provides the institutions, and we'll talk about one of those institutions with adventure playgrounds, where we allow children to explore things. We are a child-friendly society that recognizes that a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old do not think like an adult. They are there to have a wild time. They are there to push the boundaries because that's part of their growth as human beings. If the society as a whole has that mentality, that could also be helpful to a child. Additionally, a child may be given a value to live by, a religious system, let's say, or a community, and that will also help them be anchored to something that solves issues potentially. I'll speak from experience on that. It's very clear, I think, from people in the class that my wife and I were what the external world would probably call us Orthodox Jews, Hasidic Jews, whatever it is. But I can say very proudly, I think, that my children, whatever situation that they grow up in, and hopefully our parenting is good, and hopefully it's consistent with what we talked about as positive warmth and guidance. But one of the things that I noticed with my children is a lot of the material, obviously, in our home, especially with our iPad and YouTube videos, it's oriented towards Jewish religious content. So I actually am very proud of my children when they talk about doing good for other people. This is nice. We should make other people feel good about themselves. I think those values a child connects to, even it doesn't even have to be a religious context per se. It could be a context of a society that we live in, whatever it may be. A value to live by can give a child meaning that maybe if they don't get it at home, that enables them to get beyond any quashing that happens as a result of the parents. The opportunity is for a trusted practitioner to become an important source of reassurance. That's obviously later on in life by combating guilt and supporting the courage and determination needed to fight a serious illness. Focusing on attaining reasonable goals that build self-esteem and expanding support networks in the community are crucial. So that's obviously later in life, but those are other solutions for the quashing of the child's initiative. Next stage and the consequences of quashing. What happens in the next stage? Why is it so consequential whether the parents quash this initiative from the children? The free play of the earlier period now becomes subordinated to rules and regulations and more structured activities. When you turn 7, 8, 9, there's more rules that you have to follow. The child must learn to follow and respect rules and become committed to the ideas of cooperation and team effort and fair play. If the child is not given the opportunity to explore in the previous stage, i.e. in stage 3, their desire to work with others or follow rules is diminished. And that could lead to very negative consequences in the next stage, where they're trying to develop not only a sense of themselves, but on how they interact with others and the world around them in a much deeper fashion. One risk is that the child may become obsessive with his or her own power and control, constantly testing limits to check on the rigidity of those limits. So a child is not given their own power to be able to determine their own lot or their own environment. In stage 3, The result is a child who doesn't feel comfortable with themselves enough to not be constantly testing limits. So I wanted to share this video about what's called, a term called adventure playgrounds. We'll see in the next video. When my wife was in Bank Street School of Education, this is something she shared with me, and I think it's very relevant to this stage.
The yard is a children's wonderland. 50,000 square foot of pure joy. It's New York City's only adventure playground. It's a junkyard heaven with loose parts and all kinds of materials for kids to play and build and create and also to destroy.
This is the New York City version of what some of us grew up with. There was a lot less supervision than a lot now. You're out playing with whatever was hanging around.
Play today for so many children looks really different from that. There are fewer places in the city for kids to play. There are few opportunities for them to play unsupervised without adults telling them how to do it.
Well, my son is really just obsessed with the hammer. I think he just is going around hammering things.
They pretty quickly figure out that they're not being watched, they're not being supervised, they're not being told what to do, so they have to figure it out for themselves.
Children's lives are constantly mediated by adults. Risky play, as we think of it, is crucial. It's important for kids to learn to take their own risks and to risk assess their own behavior. Risk is positive. Risk is really good.
Well, we watched some kid, not our son, kind of saw himself a little bit, and there was no blood, and he kind of looked injured for a moment, and then he got back to work.
People forget that children are people. You feel that you have to show them everything and that your way is right. And I think it's incredibly valuable to remember that kids have agency and they have rights and they need space and tools and support, but they will make, for the most part, the right choice.
Kids are pretty good without us. They do all right.
So I think it's important to note about this type of playground that there is supervision of the playground. As you saw, if we look back a little bit, maybe I'll show it right now, in a certain part of the video, you'll see that there is a staff member watching the kids. One second, I just want to show it right here. You see the staff member right here. So it's not like these playgrounds are unsupervised completely, right? Children are being given a safe place. It doesn't look so safe, I have to admit. I would be scared to let my kids go into this at first. I would hope that I would get rid of that fear, though, to be honest with you. But you see, there is a staff member, and that's what we're going to see is one of the reasons why these playgrounds are not so popular in America, because you have to staff them. It's much easier to have a playground that's safe. But nonetheless, parents are not telling their kids what they should be doing with what. And that's really what Stage 3 is all about. This could enable, as you saw, there was a parent who was a parent of a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. Hopefully I'll be able to show it here, right here. As you can see from his, let me see if I can find, it said before that he was a parent of a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. And that's real. The 5-year-old is exactly in that Stage 3. 2-year-old might be too early, obviously. Maybe that's not the smartest choice. I'm not sure exactly. But a 5-year-old, that's exactly who's interested in banging that hammer and playing with that piece of wood. There's another video I wanted to show you all about what's called adventure playgrounds, a little bit more of the history, and why it is that maybe safe playgrounds, what we consider to be safe playgrounds, might actually be more harmful to children, not only from the perspective of Stage 3, but also from the perspective of of safety, literal safety. Children, when they are in control of their own environments, can be more safe than environments that they cannot control. And we'll see that in a second.
When you imagine a playground, chances are it looks something like this. There's usually a slide, a bridge, and a high point with a domed roof. That's what makes this a playground, and this, and this. But what about this? This isn't a junkyard. It's called an adventure playground. Here, there are no plastic play structures, just things like old tires, wood planks, and hammers and nails. Places like this represent one of the most debated ideas in play architecture, that playgrounds should be designed to let kids take more risks. Now, this nightmare for helicopter parents is the hottest new thing in American playgrounds, because there's growing evidence that play like this is a whole lot healthier and safer for kids.
They can play with very dangerous tools, they can take really dangerous risks and overcome them, and this builds up a tremendous sense of self-confidence in themselves, which is really quite fascinating to watch.
That's Marjorie Allen. She was a British landscape architect and children's welfare advocate around the middle of the century. In 1945, she visited Copenhagen, where she met an architect named Carl Theodor Sorensen. 2 years earlier, during the German occupation of Denmark, Sorensen noticed a problem. Kids in his neighborhood weren't using playgrounds. In fact, they were playing just about everywhere else, even in construction sites and bombed-out buildings. So in a housing development in the suburbs of Copenhagen, Sorensen closed off an empty lot and filled it with building materials, discarded objects, and tools. Here, kids could dig and build and invent on their own. The play structures were ultimately designed by the kids themselves. Sorensen called it a junk playground, and kids and parents loved it. When she returned to England, Marjorie Allen started opening similar playgrounds all across London, and she renamed them from junk to adventure. From there, they became a global phenomenon. They spread to Minneapolis, Boston, Toronto, Tokyo, Houston, Berkeley, Berlin. And to create these playgrounds, designers had to introduce a critical element: controlled risk. In this context, a risk isn't the same thing as a hazard. When you're climbing a tall tree, a rotten branch is a hazard. The threat is unexpected. But how high you climb is a risk. It's manageable and requires you to actively make a decision. You can break the elements of controlled risk down into 6 categories: heights, speed, tools, dangerous elements, rough and tumble play, and the ability to disappear or become lost. And a good adventure playground includes a mix of these. Designers also focus on separation of space. To give kids the feeling of discovering things on their own, parents have to stay out. That can mean installing a physical barrier or providing things like restrooms, cafes, and seating so that parental experience isn't an afterthought. Finally, designers fill it with loose parts. These are the manipulatable objects, the planks, barrels, bricks, and tools that fuel risky play. The idea behind all these design elements is that kids respond well to being treated seriously. If they're presented with risky items with a serious functional purpose, they'll respond cautiously and conduct more experimentation. But if presented with an overly safe, static space, they often wind up seeking dangerous thrills that the built environment fails to provide, which can result in higher injury rates than risky play at adventure playgrounds. In the US, a culture of lawsuit-proof playscape design means that overly safe playgrounds are the norm, and design philosophy is focused on how to reduce height, movement, and hard materials, and that hasn't made playgrounds better. When Marjorie Allen visited American playgrounds in 1965, she called them an administrator's heaven and a child's hell. But adventure playgrounds have recently begun to catch on in the US, perhaps due to an effort to introduce more unstructured play. And their construction comes with a fair share of criticism.
They're making kids play with hammers and nails. That's not adventure, it's just work. They're tricking kids into building their own playground.
Adventure playgrounds do have downsides. They're pretty ugly, they require a lot of space, and they need resources to staff and maintain. And as with any playground, there is an opportunity for injury, but the underlying philosophy of risky play can help kids live better lives. For one thing, riskier playgrounds encourage more activity. A study comparing playgrounds in London, where risky play spaces are popular, to those in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York, found that children using London's playgrounds were up to 18% more physically active. The London playgrounds were cheaper and boasted fewer injuries too. And multiple studies have shown that children who engage in risky play have better risk detection, creativity, and self-esteem. The playground is one of the only kinds of architecture designed specifically for children. And if the standard model we've decided on is seen as boring by its users, that's a problem. Better design can fix that, even if it's a little risky. I had to look through so many pictures of playgrounds for this story that I decided to use Wix to create a website collecting all of the
So we're not going to do the advertisement, obviously, but something that's interesting that is very counterintuitive and obviously controversial to a certain extent, but it was emphasized by this video, is that giving children the right to be able to choose their own environment actually made it safer for them. So one thing I would criticize, not even, I'm being a little facetious when I say this, and I'm not being literal when I say this, is I would think it's also an administrator's hell. It's an administrator's heaven and a child's hell. It's an administrator's hell potentially as well if children are getting more hurt on a regular playground, on what's called a safe playground. And I see this with my children themselves. My 4-year-old Nechama, and we'll talk about Nechama in a second, loves testing the waters and seeing the extent to which she can go with things. She goes to a playground. She will go on the swing the wrong way because she wants to see how it feels and what it feels like. So it might be more dangerous for her to be in an environment which is considered to be more, quote unquote, safe, more controlled, because she's going to test the waters rather than being in an environment where she makes her own reality. And that's really what Stage 3 is all about. So we're going to do an emphasis on Nechama, my daughter Nechama. She's there at an event. She has face paint on. She's a beautiful girl. Thank God. So this is a little bit, sorry for this slide, but Professor Elder says the life course provides a framework for studying phenomena at the nexus of social pathways, developmental trajectories, and social change. Nechama's current stage is a direct reflection of what happened in her previous growth stages, and the results from her preschool years will formulate largely her personality and sense of self. Nechama is incredibly sensitive about the ability to bathe herself. She's starting to, instead of us just putting water on her and cleaning her, she wants to lay down in the bath. She wants to clean herself. She wants to clothe herself. Nechama does not let us put clothing on her in the morning, and it creates very funny results because Nechama doesn't really have a sense of style. She put on purple pants with, I don't know, whatever she puts on, and nothing matches. It's like the colors of the rainbow, and she wants to get things done by herself. So tonight I made pancakes for dinner. She wanted to help me mix the batter. She wanted to put in the eggs. She wanted to feel the eggs. She wanted to feel the batter. Not only taste the batter, but feel it as well. Nechama acts much more aggressively with toys, explores more physical activity, and even explores herself sexually. We mentioned that before. But Nechama is the child, as opposed to Miriam, who is our 2-year-old. Nechama will take a toy and really rip it apart. If it's possible to rip it apart, she'll take it to its nth degree and explore things much more, because she's at that age where she's exploring her environment. When she is told she cannot do something, she has a fear of flight and responds strongly. Nechama does not like when we tell her that she cannot do something. She wants to determine her own reality. And like we mentioned before, sometimes she is afraid of things, but when she creates her own reality, her own safe space, she can do the craziest things imaginable. The intervention for her, at least, that would be most helpful, and she's getting it, thank God, at preschool right now, is what is called a see-it and support from city government with someone who can help Nechama calm down, rationalize ideas in an ordered fashion, and keep her focused on one task at hand. So Nechama has a hard time taking a feeling and not expressing it immediately into physical action, and see-it helps her with that. She generally also, in the topic of a conversation, if you sit down and have a serious conversation with Nechama, she'll go from one topic to another in a flash, as if it was any logical sense. One second she'll talk about a book, and then she'll talk about airplanes. The two have nothing to do with each other. The book's not even about airplanes. The book's about whatever it is. And then she'll say, oh, I love airplanes. So the current intervention is to keep her focused on one task at hand. But again, she wants to create her own environment. She feels most safe in that as well. The alternative theory to Erikson's ideas are Piaget. I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly. He saw the preschoolers' thinking as rigid, captured by appearances, insensitive to inconsistencies, and tied to their own perspective. A quality they called egocentrism. We mentioned egocentrism earlier. But this theory would be in counter to Erikson's. Erikson is that the child wants to be the opposite of being rigid. They are not tied to their own perspective necessarily, though they view the world mostly from their perspective. They want to test the waters, according to Erikson. This theory is helpful to consider because Nechama does consistently view her perspective as more important than other children's perspective. While she is tremendously intelligent, she does jump from one topic of conversation to another within 2 sentences, which makes me believe she's not aware of the logic of all of her thoughts. She is in her own world. So that is not surprising in stage 3. As we mentioned before, it's the me versus not me. It's not that the child has developed any essential sense of empathy or sympathy for the other. The child at this age just merely recognizes that there is something that is not me. Nechama is constantly testing the waters. She's trying to feel where she is in this world and where her parents and how her parents are reactive to her. And it is in this stage 3 where such powerful impact for the child can be expressed the most. Thank you so much for listening.